All right, good afternoon. I'm Captain Jeff Heames. I'm the commander of Surface Development Squadron 1, and we're here with an operators panel, and it's just fitting to be out in this location on the waterfront. Just early this morning, we saw USS Pinckney returning from deployment, headed home, victorious as you feel coming back from a long deployment. Pinckney, of course, Desron 23 ship. Very proud of her doing a second run on deployment. Also behind you, if you've had a chance to look at the Sea Hawk, that's one of our unmanned surface vessels at Surface Development Squadron 1, which we'll be talking a little bit about. The broad theme here for our operators panel really is about integrating technology and experimentation into fleet operations, and we got some folks up here that are SMEs in that area. We're of course interested in what they've got to say, but I'm also interested in what you've got to say. So I'd ask that you think through some questions for us. The SNA has given you a very clever QR code that you can use on your phone to just type in a question. It's pretty useful. We've seen it to good effect in the last couple of panels, so I appreciate your participation in that respect. So for the rules of engagement, this is operators panel, so thanks in advance for keeping it classified for your questioning as well as your responses. That's very important. I'd also just one other public service announcement. We have the USS Michael Monsoor down at Pier 12. We've made her available for some tours, so if you're interested in seeing that ship, which is tremendous, please take us up on the offer and figure out how to get down there for a tour. If you're part of a wardroom on the waterfront and you want to get your entire wardroom over there for a tour, hit one of my staff members up or myself and we'll find a way to do that. I think it's very important that we share that ship with the waterfront and show the waterfront what we're doing. Okay, with that, I know we want to hear from our panelists here. And what I'd like to do is just start off with some introductions of each of the panelists, and they can talk about who they are, what their background is, and kind of what's on their mind now in terms of what they're tackling. We'll start here to my right, Captain Rochlow.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start out a little different. Show of hands, who watched the Olympics this year? Swifter, higher, stronger. It's the motto of the Olympics. And I'm going to bring it back to our naval institution. The preliminary heat of the 100-meter for men's, on paper, the team was the fastest in the world, the fastest by a long shot. At the conclusion of that heat, they were soundly defeated by the Chinese team. And for those that didn't follow this, it was the preparation of the Chinese team that led them to their victory. And this is something I think about quite a bit because we can have a lot of great machinery, but we got to prepare. And the former Olympian Carl Lewis really, he said it succinctly. I won't repeat him. Call sign Papa Roach, HSC Wing Pack, roughly 187 helicopters. We deploy in pretty much every theater except 6th Fleet and 2nd Fleet, LCS, L-Class, CVN. We also field the MQ-8 Charlie, MQ-8 Bravo. And the elephant in the room might be it's currently not flying. We had a couple mishaps. And I have full ownership about getting after that. And I'm going to provide you insight of what I've learned really examining that platform. I look forward to your questions.
Good morning, I'm Andy Liggett. I'm the third commanding officer of USS Michael Monsoor. I've been on board for about 2.5 years, in command for about a year after fleeting up from EXO. Started off with the Combat Systems Avail, or PDA here in San Diego. We are designated as the aviation and USW test ship for the 1000 class as we march towards an IOC of December 21 for the 1000 class. Just got back earlier this week of doing some aviation operations with HSM 35, so I'm very liquored up on our rotary wing brothers and sisters out there. Just had a fantastic underway. We are first in line for getting getting the Fire Scout on board Monsoor once we work through those issues. But I think the main reason I've been asked to sit on this panel today is our participation in the integrated battle problem earlier this year, and I'm very excited to take questions and discuss that. We've got some planners here that were involved in that as well. As far as my recent background, 05 Command, I was on Decatur here in San Diego. I did a BMD deployment, SM-3 test shot, and DSRA. And then in between command tours, I was working with Admiral Robertson at SWAS, where I was the N-72 director in charge of JO training, ship handling, and navigation, and had the opportunity to work with Admiral Robertson on many of the comprehensive review initiatives with the JOD course, Mariner Skills Logbook, and OD competency. But really, I appreciate the invite from SNA. I'm excited to represent our community and, more importantly, the 1000 class here today.
Afternoon, Lieutenant Commander John Noda. I fairly recently checked in to Surf Devron, take over the USV portfolio for Captain Heems. Background, I am, as a department head, I was an engineer and an N4, and most recently came from the Navy Budget Office in DC, where I worked as a congressional liaison. So kind of work in the unmanned surface vessel portfolio out of DC for the Budget Office with the appropriations committees, and then transitioned to this job. Since I've been here, we've taken these vessels underway, 3 separate operations, all the way up, including Pac Norwest, and then here off of SoCal. So this area of discussion is definitely an interest item for me, and I think there's a lot of value for us as fleet operators. So I really look forward to the discussion here today.
Okay, good morning, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Doyle. I'm currently the Desron 21 N8, the Combat Systems Officer there. Quick background for myself. Most recently, Sea Tour was the WEP CSO fleet up on Stockdale, and then I've been at Desron 21 now almost 2 years. One of the main reasons, similar to Captain Leggett, of why I think I'm here, the integrated battle problem. I was the main planner for the SM-6 live fire and coordinating all the efforts and entities into that to make that a successful event. So I look forward to discussing that and taking any questions you may have.
Awesome, thanks very much. So as I've mentioned, Jeff Heems, Surf Devron 1, and I look at my background and I'm thinking to myself, what tours have prepared me for the current job that I'm in? And it's a tough one to answer, but I'll give it a stab. First, command of Preble, DDG-88, and then I went to SMITIC as the N3, and honestly, that tour was amazing. I learned a ton about operating, and then here I am at Surf Devron 1 after completing command tour at Desron 23. So a lot of tours at sea, ashore, working in ops, and really, really proud to be here at Surf Devron 1. I will say just a couple of things about our charter at Surf Devron 1 that maybe you are well aware of, maybe not, but we've got 3 lines of operations. The first one is broad charter of capability development operations in support of fleet commanders and surface force tasking. So that's a pretty broad one. And then 2 that are more narrow. The first of the 2 is unmanned surface vehicles, one of which is behind you. We've got 2 vessels like the Seahawk and the Sea Hunter. They're medium displacement USVs that are working for us at the Surf Devron. We expect to add a few more USVs. They're part of the Ghost Fleet Overlord program sponsored by the Strategic Capabilities Office. Some of those vessels will flow into the Navy and Surf Devron in the coming years. And we'll be standing up part of an organization, the Unmanned Surface Division 1, and that command, it'll be a new command, will be standing up out of Naval Base Ventura County up near Port Hueneme. So that's very exciting. It's coming probably around mid next year. We'll stand up that command, and that's where all of our experimentation and operations with USVs will be based out of. So that's very, very exciting. And the last part of our charter here is ISIC functions for the DDG 1000 class. That includes USS Zumwalt that's stationed here in San Diego, and of course Michael Mansour. The thing I can tell you about those ships is they are tremendous and they are very unique. If you've seen them coming in and out of the waterfront, you know they are just striking to look at, and there's a tremendous amount of capability that we're aspiring to build into those ships. So with that, first question over to Captain Andy Liggett is really what's unique about them from your perspective? What are you focused on generating as that capability is delivered through the end of this year and then, of course, beyond?
Yeah, like I said, we initially we're focused on Monsoor. We're focused on aviation at USW. Zumwalt is our sister ship is very actively involved in the SUW and AW mission areas. On the verge of the first supersonic inbound test with them in a couple weeks here. But a lot of our focus right now is certainly looking forward to collective prompt strike and the introduction of hypersonics into the surface force, and it's something we're driving towards. It is a couple years out, but it is our opportunity to provide a very unique, very relevant tactical capability into the Western Pacific. So it's coming fast as far as weapons development goes. You know, we're looking at a capability that we weren't even talking about a couple years ago on board Monsoor, Zumwalt, and LBJ, all three by the end of this decade, and on Zumwalt even earlier. So a lot of our thought process and tactical planning is going into what that employment would look like. Obviously, we're not a strike group deploying ship out there. I think the employment model would probably look a lot more like a SSBN or Seawolf class deployment, but that's kind of where our heads are right now, and we're thinking about how we would employ that out there. You know, as far as looking at new systems, you know, I think it's pretty well documented that the Zumwalt class was delivered with a number of experimental systems on board. I certainly don't consider us to be a test bed or an experimental platform, but at the same time, we're doing a lot of stuff that is going to influence future ship classes. And I'll go over to aviation to keep things in the unclassed realm. You know, this past week we had the test pilots from HX-21 on board from Pax River, and we had about the last year we had been working on getting the advanced flight deck lighting system installed on the ship. I didn't really have an appreciation for what it was bringing to the table until I got these pilots out there and looking at it. When you look at the 51 class, pretty good lighting system on it, but we delivered that before we were flying on goggles and doing aided and landings on there. And this system that we brought, I mean, these test pilots were just raving about it. It's got all of these IR options, the ability to dial up, dial down the lighting. Really good photo of it on Surface Warrior Facebook page. If you haven't seen it, you know, one of the cooler Monsoor pictures out there. But we're doing a lot of that stuff, and that appears to be a huge win for the 1000 class. We've got other technologies out there that we're taking a good look at, and it's some of them are great, some of them are going to fall on the cutting room floor. But that's not a bad thing, because as we look at FFG 62 and ships beyond that, we are informing that process on a daily basis. So that's and then unclassed realm. That's a pretty good example of some of the stuff we're looking at, but we're looking at it on a daily basis. On the engineering side, the electrical plant is it's an amazing system that we've got. We've been working through it for a couple of years. Royal Navy has a couple years on us with full electric, and if I was sitting here at SNA 2019, I probably would have had a different impression of it. But we have worked through it, and I do think that IPS, the Integrated Power System, is going to be a viable propulsion system for us moving forward later into this decade and beyond.
Great, thanks. I was recently out on Zumwalt. We're doing a nav check ride, as you do as an ISIC function, and I got to rib back ashore. And I can just tell you the rib arrangement was really smooth and very safe. I mean, it comes in through a little stern gate, and you know, from years of boat ops on DDG 51 class, I mean, I'm seeing some heads nod about how just tenuous that situation can be as you're kind of hung out over the side of the the vessel and you're being brought up and down in the boat. I think that's a tremendous leap forward in terms of safety and handling. Now there's some nuances in working through a new system that really for our part at the Surf Devron, we really want to advocate for. So as we look at the new technologies that are part of the Zumwalt class, we're really looking at it through those lenses of, hey, is it viable? Is it getting us what we need? What else would we need to do to it, to tweak it to make it even better, and or advocate for it so that it can be as fully mature as possible and we can learn as much as we can from it. So that's pretty neat. Appreciate you sharing the integrated power conversation. Maybe you could talk just briefly about the theme of automation. And the reason I ask that question is on the USV behind you, we are aspiring to a level of automation that is graduate level automation. If you're going to take the humans off, you really don't have a relief valve like a human that hey, the automation didn't quite work, so we're going to use the humans to cover the gap. There's no opportunity for that. So we have to get it right on the USVs to be unmanned. And then we're making some progress in that respect on DG-1000. So maybe you could talk through that, sir.
Sure, and let me stay on the HM&E side of the house for automation. I think a really good example is one of the unique casualties that we have on the 1000 class is a dark ship event when we lose power. We don't have RIMs or HP air flasks to bring the generators back online. So what we have is we have two Caterpillar emergency diesel generators, which essentially provide a defibrillator type of function for the ship, just giving a pulse to those generators to get us back up and running. My first weekend on Mansour as XO, we had a dark ship event. Got on board about an hour after it. We had lost all power, all DC systems. Fed Fire was running a hose up the brow. And it ended up being about 4 hours before we were able to restore, and months of forensics on what systems, batteries drained and everything like that. So these are very, very unique and very catastrophic casualties with a very important time component to it. So we go off kind of an embankment at about the 9-minute point, and then we go off a pretty serious cliff at about the 25-minute point if we haven't restored power to the ship. So when I was doing this in 2019, all of the recoveries were had very little automation to them, and it was a ship's force recovery similar to what you would see as casualty recovery on a 51 or 47 class. Over the past 2 years, we've worked with our industry partners, and we have significantly developed the automation component of our engineering control system now. Where we are today is we experience a dark ship event, which is, if we lose power here at the pier or something happens with one of our switchboards, we immediately push a man out of the loop button, and the system recovers for us. So our engineering control system looks at what pumps are available, it monitors chill water temperatures, it picks the best AC to bring back online, and then it walks around the ship restoring power on a prioritization basis. It's amazing. I mean, we just sit there and watch it, and it's hands off. EAP has no idea what to do with us. They just sit there. They're trying to grade our sailors on how we're recovering, and we just watch the 1000 class engineering control system. I mean, it is a marvel. And again, something, if we're having this discussion in 2019, very, very different discussion, but I am a believer now, and I think we are making those leaps and bounds, and we're making them relatively quickly on the 1000 class as we look to deliver the ship class to the fleet later this year.
That's just super, and just a great example of really identifying a problem and working your way through it to really get every yard of the 50-yard dash. We didn't run 59 yards or 49 yards and say, hey, we're almost there. We completed the race in that respect. And again, that's just what we're doing with that class. We're tackling every problem, swarming it, trying to get it all the way to the vision that we started with. And I think we've got some success. That's really nice to hear about it. So in that line of getting out into your technology, discovering what it is you had hoped to achieve, and really targeting a pathway to achieve that. We have with us our aviation partners, and they've been on this road for unmanned aerial systems for a long time. We have a lot to learn from them, as well as our undersea partners. And I'm really happy that you're here, Papa Roach. And if you could just sketch out for us, starting out in the unmanned systems realm, you've been in there for years. We've got the Fire Scout, it's done deployments for us on LCS. It's done lots of integration with the MH-60 Romeo. If you could give us some advice based on what you've seen and had to work through, what would it be?
It's a great question. I think we've probably learned a lot of things from the initial MQ-8 program, as many probably know, was a Juon that rose out of Special Forces requirements. And that was aboard an FFG, and it was a fully manned, fully resourced platform. And we also, essentially, we had NGC, who was the prime for the MQ-8, available. So we learned a lot in the initial days of how we could use unmanned, and it was very effective. I think, going forward, one of the things I've learned when you say, you can learn a lot from the aviation side, I will tell you what I am pressing my team towards is we have friends out at Creech who have been doing this since before 9/11. Yeah. And I think for me, when I started really diving into the return to flight, I challenged my team. I was like, get out to Nellis. I want to see what they're doing because I don't want to play whack-a-mole on, the next problem. I want to kind of fully understand the nature of the systems integration. And I could probably wax for a long time, but I will tell you, one of the interesting things Jeff and I were talking about last night is software. And for those that are familiar with aviation, we also have NATOPS. And it seems obvious, but when I briefed the Air Boss several weeks ago, I said software equals NATOPS, NATOPS equals software. And if there's any differentiation in the Fire Scout system in particular, then you potentially have a gap. So I would say that was something that I am angling in on. And the assumed risk, and I use the dark ship, using that as a lens, there are certain things that the Fire Scout software, there's chinks in that armor. And I got to look at it and I go, hey, is there a procedural control in place that can be executed by the Mod O operator? And if the answer is no, then I'm going to go back to industry in my program office and say, hey, we got to close this gap. So I would say that's something I am angled in on quite a bit. I would say the other aspect of this is look at your ConOps. It's interesting. We work over FitUps and longer. And as I examine the ConOps that were written quite a few years ago for both Triton and Fire Scout, we made a demarcation based on weight. So you go from one class of UAS to another class purely based on weight, not on complexity. And so the Fire Scout was at, I'll just, visual representation this level because of weight. A Triton is at this level because of weight. And we resourced those differently because of the weight. They both have turbine engines, they both have radar systems, and yet we decided to do different things. And one of our big learning points was there was an assumption that you could do multiple type model series. So you got to know the 60 platform and you got to know the Fire Scout platform. What we're learning is that, yeah, sure, some people can do that. We're not all created equal as far as how much information we can absorb and then act on. And one of the things we're examining is, hey, was that correct and how do we proceed? And this is something I go back to where I started. At Creech, we can learn from their over 2 decades of experience on how we need to operate a platform. I could go into software as well, and I will briefly. I will tell you from a man, train, equip standpoint, if you're running multiple platforms at multiple different software iterations, you could find yourself really getting in a death spiral as far as concurrency. So it's something that we really, as senior leaders, we have to be very astute to, because as I'm going to make the assumption, you know, we resource the platforms fully, generally speaking, and then training systems are always, you know, they're not going to get your 100% resourcing. You got to be careful with Unmanned, because our ConOp assumed that you would essentially check the UAS out of the library and it was going to work 100% on day one. I will tell you, you know, the CNO talks about it. If we are going to have ubiquitous UAS systems across the Navy, trust and having those systems really well understood is huge, both from the maintenance aspect and the operating aspect. And I'll pause there.
Hey, that's super. You know, every time we talk, I learn something new, and today is no different. I really like the analogy of software equals NATOPS. We've been struggling with one question, which is, you know, how do you manage or understand the operational risk you're taking with prototype vessels like the Seahawk behind you, and potentially various iterations of configurations in other types of USVs. So with that, I'd like to flick this question over here to John Noda, who's our USV lead at Surf Devron, and maybe just sketch out what we're doing and also maybe how we're addressing some of those configuration variance issues.
Great, thank you, sir. So, you know, I'll start by saying, you know, the USV programs and portfolio are pretty new. You know, I'm sure there are people here who, you know, this is the first time they've seen this vessel. In the Navy program, as a kind of holistic piece, it's only been around for about 2 years. I was in DC when this kind of came through in the budget. So really what we are trying to do, we are in this game pretty early as far as fleet representation. What we're really aiming to do is kind of close the gap between kind of the acquisition and the fleet to find a way to get to a capability faster. So the kind of key points there, we are taking the 2 vessels we have now, Seahawk, and the 5 other vessels that are coming down the pipe to us. We are taking those out and using those with the fleet today in exercises, in one-on-one instantiations, to include giving control of the USV's maneuvers to, you know, a DDG or an LPD at sea. Sea Hunter, her sister ship, is out right now operating with USS Anchorage with the control on Anchorage. So that's all stuff we're doing today with prototype vessels. We are involved super early with PMS 406, the program office, and also with OSD SCO, who owns the other 2 vessels that are at sea right now. I would say this is probably, you know, I'm no history expert, but I would say this is probably earlier than we've been involved in almost any program that brings this type of capability to the fleet and any kind of serious effect. And really what we're after is maximizing value and speeding up the process so that we are not waiting until we have kind of the fully baked acquisition program before we see what it is, identify kind of the gaps in the armor, and figure out what changes need to be made to make it the best product for the fleet. You know, talked about ConOps. We are developing the ConOps. First iteration of ConOps is published, and we are going through revision 1 right now. Again, trying to get ahead of the power curve and paint the ConOps picture before we start down the program of record road. We're also bringing in a kind of a different set of perspectives. Obviously, the things that we are looking at Surf Devron and asking the fleet to come in and comment on are very different things than what the acquisition community is looking at. So, we talk to PMS 406 every day. We're partners in the program moving forward. They've asked us to provide expertise in certain areas and try to build out kind of a more fleshed out mission profile on what these things are going to go do and how they're going to operate with the fleet. We've provided feedback to 406 on changes that need to be made to the human-machine interface, or things that we see, such as the software baseline concerns, that are things we need to start together, kind of work towards solving. In the big picture, one of the big advantages, I think, is we really maximize some of the test and evaluation events. So T&E typically is done through the program office, and it's really about proving the technology and verifying the maturity of the prototype. Well, we are finding ways to work the T&E schedule to support fleet events in there. So we're taking the same prototypes and combining events so that we're getting both T&E value as well as fleet exposure. So we're basically, burning both those candles down at the same time, which in the end will, again, get us through that process faster. So we're doing things in parallel versus sequentially.
So John, I got a really great question from the audience as we're marching down this pathway. It's from Admiral Robertson, Scott Robertson. The statement here is operators working with unmanned and AI systems will require certain skills of humans really to maximize their integration and tactical usage. That's absolutely true. And how do we know what those are, and how do we purposely train to them? And it's so on the one hand, you have a prototype you're taking to sea. You're trying to figure out what are the operational risk mitigations we need to put in place to implement it safely, whether it's software or it's other types of controls. On the other hand, you're trying to advance the ball down the field with an experiment that is going to be on the front end of it. So in a nutshell, we're doing this more and more frequently. And I think as we see the nexus of technology move into the commercial space, we'll need to move faster and iterate faster and get things out into the operational environments so that we can learn faster and inform the program office. One event that we did do some of that in is the integrated battle problem. And we're thankful to have here a representative from Desron 21 who was a lead planner in that activity. Now, for this group, what I would tell you is you probably are going to, and you look forward, you'll be doing more of this kind of activity. It may not be everything you're doing, but it will be a part of future operations at sea. So Ryan, if you're talking to future Desron staff planner, Fibron staff planner, officer that's going into a USS, as a department head, what do you got in terms of guidance for them if they get tasked with, hey, the next IBP or the next SWAT with a large experimentation component or what have you?
Yes, sir. I'll draw off my SM6 planning efforts. First off, has anybody ever been part of a live fire missile event planning event? So a few of us in the audience, right? For those of you that haven't, these things typically take a really long time to develop, a really long time to plan. A lot of extra grooms go into systems to making sure all the ships are full up round on anything that could possibly happen to mitigate risk while we execute these events. As John alluded to, we're trying to bring the systems out to the fleet faster and trying to get them operational. And so what we did for IBP was we planned an entire live fire event in a matter of months, vice a year or year plus, right? So kind of take that into context. And my experience prior to this event was limited to my WEP CSO tour on Stockdale, doing missile shoots, test missile shoots before you go on deployment and stuff like that. So really no experience. And so from that, I think my biggest piece of advice to a future planner doing this, it's really all about relationships, right? So I came into the process, there were already folks that were planning these events, had a lot of stake in it. To name a few, SurfPac, 3rd Fleet, Semitic, PAC Fleet, Naval Warfare Development Center, Strike Group 3, Carrier Strike Group 3. So all these folks were playing, and so I had to coordinate with all of them, communicate with all of them, and figure out how to put all the pieces together to execute the event. One of the biggest things I can recommend is reaching out to those SMEs that have done it in the past. like I said, I kind of little experience doing it, and oh, by the way, we did it right out here in the SoCal op area, which has never been done before. Usually these events are on instrumented ranges, so there's telemetry, there's data collection, there's all that stuff. The ranges up at Point Mugu typically provide range clearance, things of that nature. So I had to reach out to them and figure out how they do it up there to then translate it down to the SoCal op area. So I leaned on them really heavy to get things that we call hazard patterns to make sure that we keep everyone safe that's out there, not only on the surface, but in the air as well. So working with all of them.
A question about TTPs and things like that. I mean, are you going off of today's stuff, or you focusing some energy to make sure we're in alignment with what the current doctrine is?
Yes, sir. So all the TAC memos for SM6, the TAC memos that we have for over-the-horizon targeting, things of that nature, and really using all of the sensors and capabilities that we had afforded to us with all the ships and aircraft and the unmanned vessels that were out there to generate the track that we needed to consummate the engagement.
What about in UAS space, and in terms of TTP, if you're doing experimentation, how do you govern that in terms of this is a TTP that applies in 2050 versus something that's today?
I think in general terms, whether it's passive targeting, TDOA, radar, in general terms, it's based upon the physics of the radar set you have, and then you design, what's my optimum pulse width, what's my optimum PRF, and you design your TTPs around that. Specifically for the Fire Scout, I think the bigger takeaway here is how do we codify the man-unmanned teaming between, I'll give you a great example. So, we have NSM on LCS. And, we're going to have SAO 7000 integration. And my nirvana would be, for you guys to have that 10,000 foot radar mast planted out 100 miles away from the ship, passive targeting, giving you commander's decision space to do as you will with the naval strike missile. If I could circle back to the Admiral's question, because I find this very fascinating. So obviously hired as a pilot into the Navy. And when you, notice I'm saying when you operate the Fire Scout, I didn't say when you fly it. There are some assumptions we have baked into us from our training that can set up bad biases. And I'll give you the example. If I'm in an aircraft, I am controlling the torque. There are certain things I just assume I can do as a pilot. And I'm going to give you an example of the software. It's kind of human nature. I bet you if I asked everybody, about flank speed or Windows 10, you probably click through stuff because you're like, it doesn't matter, I get this every day. I will tell you with unmanned platforms, you have to pay attention to everything. And I liken it to being more of a person that understands the software code. And it doesn't mean a pilot can't do it, but you have to kind of get rid of all your pre-assumed assumptions. And I will assume that, rules of the road, there's certain logic hierarchy in the system that it will say, hey, if I have a contact within so far, I would tell everybody to look for the corner cases where, that person in the program office goes, hey, anybody would understand that. And I'd say, put the JG in there and let the JG red cell the system, because that's where you're going to find out where the corner cases are in the software logic.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts on this topic?
Sure, sir, if I may, I think there's a lot that we still need to work through to figure out, the level of involvement as a maintainer or an operator, and what the right rating is, and all that stuff in the unmanned world. But I do think it's a path we've kind of been on for a while. When I was second tour Divo, I was on John Paul Jones, one of the first modernized DDGs. Went through the yard period, fairly immature training pipeline. Me and a bunch of GSEs and GSMs went out to LBES in Philadelphia for the school. They sat there and explained to us the whole architecture for this new machinery control system. I was sitting next to one of our GSE-3s, and they're talking about IP addresses and how the different Windows-based computers talk to one another. And I turned to the GSE-3 and I said, "Do you know what an IP address is?" And she was like, "No." So, I mean, I think fundamentally, the way things are going is much more software-based across the Navy. So I don't think this is a problem set that's exclusive to unmanned, but it definitely is amplified by the reliance on the software that you bring with unmanned, to the Commodore's earlier point where we don't have the manpower to fill that gap. We really need to understand it, understand the decisions it's making, and right now in the prototype stage particularly, you look at a program like Aegis, which is a software-based program. I think there was a really good depth of knowledge on how Aegis operates, how it makes decisions, and a good fleet feedback loop between us and the civilian engineers. I think we need to kind of quickly get to that level of maturity on the software side, so that we understand the risk at each iteration.
Yeah, look, Papa Roach, I really appreciate you bringing up the manned and machine or manned and unmanned teaming, because we see it in a variety of instantiations. Out at IBP, we had sailors that were controlling unmanned vessels doing different missions. That's one form of teaming. You have it with the Fire Scout. We also, oddly enough, have man and machine teaming with automation, and you can see instantiations of that inside of the Zumwalt, depending on the degree of automation. And I think broadly this theme that we're scratching at here is how much training, what kind of preparedness, and in terms of operating or maintaining as well as exercising TTP do we need to really get after the unmanned application space, which is tremendous. And I look back at our charter, and it's really about fleet transition, managing the transition of USVs, for example, to fleet operations means drilling into these topics, really understanding what it means from a logistics and sustainment or manning perspective and training, and then integrating that capability into the fleet, which really is more about, can you integrate into the CWC architecture, for example? How do you make sure that the capability or the payload output is aligned to what the operator needs and can close that last mile all the way to that operator to provide the benefit? And then the last part is the operations that we're doing. What are they? Are they exclusively oriented to test and evaluation? Are they hybrids of test and evaluation plus operations for some additional discoveries? Are they organized in a coherent way? And do they have the right kind of risk mitigations in place? So really, really great discussion. I appreciate it. I'd like to just kind of go around again and just give you an opportunity to share any other thoughts in that space. Papa Roach.
Just real quick, I was telling Air Boss, really my thinking has evolved about unmanned systems. And I think maybe five or so years ago, and I could be mistaken, that people looked at this through a financial lens, and you got to be careful, right? It should be all about capability. And probably the pure example is MQ-25. I need striking distance off the carrier, and I can do that through unmanned systems, right? If I have a cockpit and I have all the life support equipment for a pilot, I don't get the speed and reach to execute a strike. The same goes for MQ-8 program. Aspirationally, that's 10 hours of endurance. And if I gave you 2 MQ-8s with radar, passive targeting, and other sensors, you pretty much have 100% persistence. And that's a win. And those are the reasons why we go to unmanned systems. But if you look at it, you may be able to eventually get a financial yield, return on investment that's cheaper than manned, but you shouldn't approach it from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of pivot off from the comments on the integrated battle problem and my thoughts there. Ryan and Commodore Zare's team did a fantastic job. He mentioned they had a matter of months to prepare for that event. On Mansour, we found ourselves dropped into the event with a matter of weeks. And kind of like what Ryan was talking about, I had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 live fire events under my belt before I came into this, and this event looked like nothing I had ever seen before. Ryan mentioned we were not on an instrumented range, we were just kind of off the coast here. The army of Dahlgren and Port Hueneme tech reps coming on board and tweaking your systems and swapping out driver pre-drivers, giving you Aegis doctrine for the shot. None of that stuff happened. Was there a script for John Finn to launch the SM-6 missile? Yes, there was. And we had safeties in place, and Ryan and his team did a great job doing that. But the goals of the live fire event were very different from your average C squad or structural test fire event, where you work to drive the risk down as close to zero as you can. What type of mitigators can you put into place to just drive that risk down? I think what we went out there and did is we had an allowable amount of risk, and what that did is we allowed ambiguities and unpredicted variables to enter into the live fire event that would probably normally result in a ceasefire or a CANX type of environment. But these risks were very well calculated and very well understood before we went out there, and the environment that produced for us was very conducive to experimentation and to real-time tactical decision making. And in this environment where the ships hadn't worked together before, we are in the battle space with unmanned vessels, unmanned aircraft, technologies in various degrees of maturity. We kind of put it all together there, and some of it performed better than we expected it would. Some of it didn't, but none of that was considered a failure. If something didn't work, we learned a lot about those systems, and we learned how to better employ them the next time around. And this is happening fast. I mean, our turning radius on evaluation, making course corrections, and then going back out to sea and testing it in an operational environment like the integrated battle problem, what used to be years is now months. It's an exciting time, and I feel very fortunate to have been given the opportunity to operate in that type of environment. I certainly feel like I am a better prepared warfighter. My crew is better prepared after operating in that type of environment.
Thanks. I want to add a couple other questions in here as we proceed along, so we're going to shift gears just a hair. And just if you could offer us some perspective. I mean, not everyone here is familiar with operating a fire scout or what it takes. Can you walk us through like day in a life of a maintainer or an operator of a fire scout? What does that look like?
Sure, I'll tackle the operation. And for the fire scout system, it kind of comes back to where I talked about flying versus operating. For the fire scout system, it's really about the mission planning. So you arrive, you have a hop later in the afternoon, you could plan the day prior, but really all the nuts and bolts of that mission is in the mission plan. Now, I do have options to go off script, but some of the most critical information is in that mission planning software. And I would say, it's analogous to I'm writing the software that the Fire Scout AV is going to act on. And it's critical because, this goes back to, this isn't a term I knew as a pilot until I started digging into this for Fire Scout. Ellipsoid altitude. And, I'm sure somebody out there is familiar with ellipsoid altitude, but knowing and understanding how the logic derives, how it senses it is, where it is in space, is key, especially if you're not fully understanding of the, I go back to, you may have biases as a pilot, right? But if you understand how that software is written and how it derives its sense in space, is a critical understanding. And then, I'll go back to the maintenance technicians. in kind of our ConOp. Based on that weight, we went with we call it a mech tech. So they fully have to know how to repair and fix a 60 Sierra. They also need to understand how to fix a Charlie out there or a Bravo. And I will say for a Bravo, which is a German Schweitzer helicopter, it has belts, it has very kind of unique innards, to kind of put it plain language, whereas the Charlie, which is a Bell 407, turbine engine, hydraulics, it's very similar. A Bravo may take several days for an engine change. A crew might be able to turn an engine change on that in a day, which is very similar to a 60. So I would say that is, that's probably principally. But then as leaders, we need to understand that if we're gonna, dual NEC somebody, I would just say we need to be mindful. Does that person have the ability to absorb that information? Because I know a lot of us don't like to say it, but there is a limit for all of us at one point of whether or not we can absorb all that information and be proficient and be ready for a potential fight.
That's a great point on cognitive loading, and particularly as we're discovering how much information we might need or want, what type of information we might want in our control system. These are frontline questions. So I wonder for you, John, if you could walk us through maybe a future cast. In a couple of years, you're at USV Division 1. What does that look like for someone who might be stationed and doing that kind of work?
Yeah, so USV Div 1, as mentioned, stands up next year in Port Hueneme. So we are in the process right now of fitting out up there and working through requirements on building out the Unmanned Operations Center that's going to serve all of these prototype vessels. So once that reaches full operational capability, you walk in there, what you're going to see is essentially a bunch of consoles and computers. Our starting kind of ConOp for the UWOC is USV operator will have cognizance over 2 vessels. So when we get to eventual end state, all these vessels will be under the same comms and C4I umbrella. So you have an operator responsible for 2 vessels, and then 1 watch officer for every 2 operators. So essentially, as a watch officer, you would be potentially overseeing 4 unmanned surface vessels, potentially operating in 4 different theaters, 4 different warfare commanders or whoever they are supporting. And that can be at all echelons, whether it's direct support to the fleet, theater ASW commander, a strike group, or direct support to a single other surface ship. We are also looking at opportunities to pair with air assets. So think, if you had Seahawk, right now she's sitting on the back of her is the deployment retrieval mechanism for a towed array. So think Seahawk with a towed array controlled by a P8. There's some huge opportunities there. But the USV Division 1 folks, to that point, are going to have to be smart in employment across that range of operations, across that vertical command structure, as well as be smart enough as if anyone stood a Zulu or a Fibron, Desron staff, every watchstander, regardless of rate, has to understand the engineering plans on your DDGs. So when you get told what the casualty is, you can translate that. Same with combat systems. So they're going to have that same kind of depth of knowledge. It's going to really go beyond, hey, do this JQR and you're qualified. There's going to have to be a little more depth there. And then there's also going to be a whole set of folks detailed up there to support the maintenance. We're still working through what the balance of that is, the sailor maintained versus contractor maintained. But all the comments today about software, as well as some unique hardware aspects on board these vessels, those folks are going to be responsible for.
So thanks. I'm taking away that there's an awful lot to unpack in that environment in terms of just really sharpening our pencils when it comes to what we want in training, what we will need. and how, not exquisite, but really precise it needs to be. You scratched also at something very important in terms of the breadth of knowledge of warfighting and all domains, and how we can nest these capabilities, the payloads, the outputs into that CWC structure is so important. I'm just curious, from a standpoint of the Desron planner at the IBP, if you've got any thoughts on how to better integrate into that CWC structure for some of our unmanned or some of our unique systems.
Yes, sir, absolutely. We, and besides the planning side of it, Desron 21 was also stood up as the Sea Combat Commander for the integrated battle problem. So we oversaw all operations during that. And what we found was we worked our hardest to stress the C2 nodes as much as we could to see where we had gaps, what worked well, what didn't work well. And we were able to provide that back to serve Devron 1 to then put into their future ConOps, and then hopefully into this new Unmanned Operations Center. And what we found was a lot of it was, at a point I was talking to an operator that was controlling one of the unmanned vessels just from the pier here, right? And if that's going to be all centralized, and that was just one of the operators, and there were operators on the ships, there were operators in different locations, and if everyone's in one spot, that I have a single point to reach out to as the Sea Combat Commander if there's an issue, if there's something I see or I want them to go do, that would benefit us greatly. And it was really cool to see how all the unmanned systems worked with the ships, really for the first time for a lot of us, and to give we talked a lot about the technical aspects of it, but from the operator's point of view, giving our sailors a chance to see what a fight in the future might look like and what capabilities these unmanned systems are going to bring to us. And one thing I thought was really cool was some of the UAVs that were out there. They've got these really long legs on them, and if I can be underway and know that there's a contact out there that I'm really interested in, and I know exactly where it's at because a UAV has been flying out there for a few days, 4 days, well before I ever get into the op area, and I can say yes for a fact that's them. That it gives me a big advantage on knowing our recognized maritime pictures is what we try to create, and I see that just being a huge benefit for future destroyers or future ships down the road as they go overseas, sir.
So just a quick segue to that. I mean, in terms of payloads, were you happy with kind of the payoff of the payloads, if you will, from the unmanned systems, broadly speaking?
Yes, sir. I was the payloads that were out there. We just mentioned the one on the Seahawk with the towed array. That was a real phenomenal capability to bring out and can help cover any sort of gaps that we have in coverage for a subsurface threat or contact that we're interested in keeping track of. There were some other payloads out there that helped us build the track targeting for the SM-6 shoot, and then the aircraft as well, the cameras, the communications capabilities, and all the other systems that they bring to our fight to help give us, like I said, that recognized maritime picture to then go forward and do our job was tremendous.
Thanks for that. So we're kind of scratching here at trust in the capability. We're seeing payloads out there that are giving us good return on investment. The broader question of, hey, what is unmanned's role in deterrence, and is there value in this proposal that unmanned can provide us more capability and potentially add value to that deterrence equation? Any thoughts on that?
I think that is a heavy one. I mean, I was talking to Jeff about before we started. One of the books I'd recommend to everybody is, and it's associated with our Naval War College, is One Nation Under Drones, and they go into some of the laws of war and the probability of providing deterrence with unmanned systems. I think obviously that there's always the opportunity to deter, and a great example is the tail. So you have a system that's providing passive capability, huge presence, and this is an area that's ripe for automation. I mean, heck, you could read an Economist article about a fishing boat off the coast of Chile observing acoustic activity over 1,000 miles away. So, I mean, the possibilities are endless when you match it with the right man technology, whether that's prompt strike, hypersonic deliverability, I think that's, when you combine it together, that's where you get the magic.
Super. Any other thoughts there?
So I would just say, I think, we as the Navy are a forward force. Presence is deterrence. For me personally, I think, to just leverage off the tow to rate thing, because that's what we keep circling back to. I mean, this vessel could take the place of a DDG doing tow to ray ops today. That relieves that DDG to go do the FON ops or the presence mission that really feeds a lot of that forward deterrence that we're doing today. So it really is, I think, a force multiplier in that you relieve your multi-mission manned platforms where able, based on kind of the operational risk and some of the laws of war type things and maturity. So I think in totality, you really are building a huge deterrence capability just in the numbers game.
That's great, thanks for that. So I got an interesting question here, pretty specific about, as we're going through the training needs, and hey, what about an unmanned WTI? That's an interesting question, and I just think I can go ahead and answer from my perspective is, I think that entire landscape is, it's open for debate and probably needs some discovery, and as I mentioned, some sharp pencils as we get in there and figure out, well, what it is that we really need, what kind of preparation and training is going to be required to not just exercise the capability afloat, but also nest in effectively to the CWC structures, ESGs, CSGs, and the other operational apparatus that we're using. So open-ended question, but I appreciate you asking that. So if we could, I'm going to go back to a previous question. It was kind of the day in the life question. And this time, I want to go back to Andy on Michael Mansour. If you could walk us through, it's minimally manned crew, lots of automation. Can you just give us some examples of what it might be like or what it is like on to be a sailor on Michael Mansour?
Sure. I think a lot of times 1000 class gets talked about in the same discussion as LCS, and I think this is probably one of the areas where that comparison actually works. I'll just give the numbers for a 51 class versus a 1000 class. Depending on the variant of 51 class, anywhere between 9,000 and 9,500 tons. We weigh in at 16,000 tons on the 1000 class, another extra 100 feet. 51 class, most muster reports come in, a little bit north of 300 sailors right now. First muster report I got on Mansour was 132. So significantly fewer sailors than a 51 class. We're around 175 right now, which I think is probably getting us to the right spot as far as manning goes to executing multiple warfare areas simultaneously on the 1000 class. But there's no doubt about it that life on the 1000 class is a little bit different. Do we have STGs that are out there streaming the tail that we're talking about? Yes, they get the opportunity to do that. Do we have CTTs that are sitting at our Slick 32 Victor 6 console? Yep, they're doing that, just like on the ship. But when we talk about launching that rib, like you saw on Zumwalt last week, is that same STG standing there launching the rib? Is a CTT sitting there as a phone talker launching the rib? Yes, they are. So our sailors work very hard. I was a little bit worried coming to the ship class about what advancement would look like, what transferring off onto other ships would look like. I never even think about that anymore. Our advancement rates are higher than fleet average. Our commissioning rates are better than fleet average. Our second tour department heads, our top second tour department heads are screening for a command at a very healthy rate. Our second tour division officers are fantastic ship handlers that are well prepared to go off and be a department head either on 1000 class or anywhere else in the fleet. But I'm at this point now where about every week I'm checking out a plank owner from Mansour. Guys and gals have been serving on board for 4 and 5 years, and it's a really fun experience. Most of them have advanced 1 or 2 pay grades, and when I think about my checkouts on other ships compared to how hard sailors have to run in the 1000 class. These sailors are very, very well prepared to contribute on day one at their next command, and the concerns about applicability and how much transferability their skill sets have to other ship classes, I'm not worried about that at all. I'm looking at an EMC of mine right out there that has been working on the 1001 electrical plant for 5 years, just transferred a couple weeks ago. That guy is gold. I mean, any ship out there would be extremely lucky to have him working their GTGs. And so I like I said, it was something I was worried about coming to the ship class, but and it is hard work. But I'm a true believer in 1000, and our sailors are excited to be there, and we're starting to see a lot more excitement. Folks coming over to the class, hey, or coming over to Monsoor, hey, I saw the ship in BBD. What's life like over here? And so that recruitment and that excitement about the ship class, I think, is building over time.
Thanks. Memory from being on board Zumwalt very clearly was talking to sailors and just being surprised at how many different jobs they were involved with. And you can get the sense that if the ship is doing one evolution, it's kind of an all hands on deck kind of activity. And the other thing I noticed was just the small size of the crew. To give you some contextual example, in engineering, which is an emphasis area for us to make sure we're sustained and manned properly there, your department's about 35 people. And as I'm walking through the spaces, which are tremendous in size and complexity, I find myself thinking, well, boy, I see EMC that's got experience. I really want to make sure we're taking that individual from the Zumwalt or Michael Monsoor, taking that experience and moving it into an area where the Navy can continue to draw benefit from their corporate knowledge and just deck plate experience. I'm curious, Papa Roach, if you had the same kind of struggle starting out where you were looking to earmark people early, grab that experience and dovetail it into other parts of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think across the force, we always have distributable challenges with personnel, and being able to use somebody with Fire Scout and refresh them is critical, because it's a perishable skill. And one of the things we have done with our WDC Nautic is we've already taken Fire Scout operators and created WTIs, so then they can come back into the community and keep that sharp focus. Where it becomes more of a challenge is with the maintenance ratings, but we're having some success with that.
Great, thanks for that perspective. I'm going to jump into another question here. It comes from Kyle Craig. Thanks, shipmate, for this question. How do we manage the physical security of USVs operating forward and alone? And are we thinking of all the systems as near offboard magazines or sensor systems? And I'll just hand that over to John. So two-part question. How do we deal with physical security? And then are we viewing them as adjunct magazines or as sensors?
Okay, so I'll take it in two parts. Physical security, definitely something we and the program office are thinking about. I think all of that solution space is still kind of in development, but I think it would, most of the things you could probably think of will probably be potential solutions, including things like zeroization for software. But we are not at a mature solution, because that'll be largely looked at for the program of record as we work through those challenges with the prototype vessels. And then sorry, what was the second part of the question was?
So the payloads are adjunct magazine or
right.
sensor.
So both, if you look at kind of the budget plan for FY22 and kind of the past couple of years, there's essentially two categories of USV that are projected for the future surface combatant force, the MUSV and the LUSV. The MUSV largely intended to be the sensor platform supporting DMO. LUSV, which is much further out in the budget world, but that primarily is intended to be the adjunct magazine, fully tied in with the Aegis combat system in a fairly, I think, the goal is a seamless format. that looks a lot like a remote engagement today.
Awesome, thank you. I'm curious if you have a similar issue in UAS
I would say
from physical security standpoint.
from a physical security, I would just say, current events several years ago, obviously, I can't recall if it was a Triton or a BAMS that was taken down in the Persian Gulf. It's always a concern, because that technology is then able to be used by our potential foes. I think when we move forward, we're going to have sense and avoid technology to prevent that. You'll have, depending on the environment, right? Right now, I would say Fire Scout is a great ISR&T platform, but it's not going to go into the blunt edge, right? And I would say, I will reach out beyond kind of my purview a little bit, and I would say there are certain environments you would not throw any helicopter into, right? Whether it's a WES of an opponent's DDG, you're just not going to do that. It's the game of sensing before being sensed, would probably be my take on it. And then future systems like NJAD or a family of systems that needs to penetrate the blunt edge, you're going to have self-protection and zeroization, safing weapons, etc.
Yeah. Thanks. I think it's a very important topic, and it sounds like we're going to need a very specific solution in the USV space there. So if we could just shift gears real quick, I want to jump back into the IBP preparation, and specifically for Ryan, your squadron just went out and did SWAT. IBP was an event that occurred before SWAT. We at Desron, I had Desron 23, we had an event that was before our SWAT as well, and we got a lot of lift out of it. I wonder if you could talk about how the IBP opportunity shaped your execution at SWAT.
Yes, sir. And for IBP, a lot of us at the Desron we're fairly new and had never actually performed the function as Sea Combat Commander out at sea. So it was a great opportunity to leverage the knowledge that we still had there to then transfer it over to folks like myself, which prepared us immensely for the future on SWAT, and we actually just finished up group sale as well. And how that translated into it was we did our best to utilize our PBED processes, our planned brief, execute, debrief process at IBP, because it was all brand new technology and a lot of brand new systems that we had never used before. So the lessons at the end of each day on how each system worked was critical to the very next day, which we then transferred over to our SWAT execution, which is a much more advanced tactical training, just like the name implies, for our DDGs after the basic phase. So we were able to take that, stress our crews, continue with those PBED processes, and really got a lot out of the IBP to transfer over there. And then we just actually finished, like I said, our successful group sale that we transferred over as well.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, it's kind of intuitive and obvious. You might think, hey, if you get a chance to go operate at sea with some of your ships before SWAT, then you go out and do SWAT, you're going to do a little bit better having worked out some of those bugs and put some grease where it needed it or glue where it needed it. So kind of with that in mind, exercising the PBED process at IBP before you go into SWAT. PBED has been a topic, at least in our lane, talking through USVs and operations at sea. How are we working on that, John?
Yeah, so one of our big projects right now in the USV space is understanding data and how we use data. We think that that's a critical part across a number of different elements of the USV programs. From the fleet perspective, because we don't have operators on board that can kind of sit there and say, hey, this went really well, this didn't. We really need to bring that data home and pretty quickly turn it around in the PBED type format to provide that positional data on what the USV was doing while whatever else was doing, whether it's tracking a submarine or doing MCON type operation with surface ships, but having that kind of ground truth view of how the USV performed tactically is one. Two is building trust and autonomy. All of us out there who drive ships for a living, I'm sure look at this thing and say, wait, that thing does coal regs on its own. Yeah, and for the most part, it does do some elements of coal regs and vessel avoidance. But in order for all of us to sit there and trust to put this thing to sea by itself, unmanned, unescorted, we really need the data today to be able to look at and say, hey, it is doing this right. It's doing it how I would do it. Or, you know, if it isn't doing it how I would do it, I understand why it did what it did. And absent that data flow and that ability to bring that back, it's really hard to build that trust. You know, and the third is more, less of us, more the program office, but it's taking all the technical data from the sensors that are perceiving the different contacts and feeding that alongside the autonomy to be able to actually evaluate technically how the sensors did in detecting a contact, fusing that with all the other sensors, feeding that the autonomy, then the autonomy then taking that and making a good decision. So all of that data work is really critical in supporting, you know, not just the PBED process, but all of the engineering backbone that's going to go behind building a trusted autonomous system.
Yeah, thanks a lot for mentioning that. I think when we're talking about trust, data certainly is part of that, and there's many layers in it. We've seen this with SWAT when we have data architecture to support replay and PBED for training purposes. You see live fire with a purpose or the data analysis working group where we're looking at systems level data to try and discern and get confidence that that's performing at the same level. So we're trying to employ the same basic methodology, and one of the watch outs we've got, or one of the risks, is that the organization writ large becomes hyper-focused in some areas, such as call regs compliance, for example, and automation in that space, and not applying the same level of focus and effort or engineering thinking in other parts of the automation, whether it's human systems interface or its ability for an automatic firefighting system to exercise a function, dewater, all those things without increasing the cognitive burden and loading on a human. So that's all very interesting space. The last part of this trust is calibrating the trust. You know, when you go home and your Roomba's running around cleaning up your floor, you know what it does for you and you know what it doesn't do for you. We really also need to train operators at sea what the USVs and payloads can and can't do for you, and I think that'll go a long way in establishing trust with our USVs. So before I hand it off for last comments, if desired, I want to just field a couple of quick questions that came in. The first one, hey, are you experimenting with UAV employment in contested littoral environments with the Marines? I can't say that we're doing that. I'm not sure about you, Papa Roach, but I know that is an exploration area, but maybe not right at Surf Devron, but it's certainly very interesting.
So the Marines have 3 VMU units, and they were using RQ-21, and then they're in the process of divestment from the RQ-21. As I understand it, they're going to go into essentially a Reaper trade space as a stopgap. One of the things is CMC, you know, there were a lot of programs like out on the furthest point of the FIDIP. He said, hey, I want to use a mature technology, so I'm going to use an MQ-9. And if you think about it, whether it's in the 7th Fleet AOR, you don't need a huge runway. You could probably use many islands, and you get persistence. So it's the way going forward. Our VMU out in Yuma is just standing up, but the moment we can start integrating with them, we will. We've done some ops off of San Clemente, and this kind of speaks to the Air Force's maturity. So in their training syllabus, they do 40 hours of live training, and their culminating event may be a live op. And this is somebody that's graduating from their training command. And so they can very readily work airspace and show up off the coast of San Clemente and work with our units. So we'll do HARPs with them, and I think that's the trade space as operators where we got to get to, and I'm pretty excited to get there.
That's great, thank you. Another question that came in from Peter Ong, Naval News. Question, hey, there's been much vague media publicity that the Zumwalt systems do and don't work. Can you give a readiness percentage or comment on the status of these ships and how ready they are for active duty with hypersonics. I think the way to answer that question, first of all, I really do appreciate it, is really this is a work in progress, and we are vigorously getting after finding the problems and swarming them and attacking them so that we can deliver the capability that we expected to on that class on a timetable that supports integration of hypersonics, which is a directive. So thanks so much for that question. I would just like to offer any closing comments if you haven't already made them or if you'd like to. Ryan.
Yes, sir. The one thing I forgot to mention, and I don't want to miss out on it, the capabilities that the unmanned systems bring to us. One thing that I worry about a lot while I'm out there, and we talked about the finding, the fixing, and engaging, but it's really the battle damage assessments or the assessing after we conduct an engagement that I really look to these systems to utilize to go out there. If I can conduct an engagement on something and I have a UAV that I can send that may be within an air to or a surface to air missile range, but it meets my commander's acceptable level of risk, that's a huge asset for me to send in there and get that assessment instead of sending, let's say, a DDG or a helicopter or flying an F-18 or MPRAs, assets like that, right? And similarly to the USVs, if they have cameras on them, or we can position the acoustic array in a spot that may even hear explosions, right, from different distances and stuff like that. So I look to see how I can use those to really close that kill chain and utilize the assets without putting our sailors' lives in risk, so to speak.
That's great. Thank you.
So I have two comments to close. You know, as I was preparing for this, I was kind of thinking about how to cage, you know, what we're doing. And I, like any good college students, use Wikipedia. So their definition of an end user is that end users typically do not possess the technical understanding or skill of the product designers, a fact easily overlooked and forgotten by designers, leading to features creating low customer satisfaction. I'm sure a lot of us can sit here and think of times on board ships where something got delivered and we were like, well, that was a really dumb way to do it, or, you know, why can't it do X, or why can't it integrate with Y? I think gone is the era where we can wait to be the end user. We're never going to move to get capability to the ships and to the fleet as fast as we need to if that's the fleet, from a fleet operator, if that's our mentality. So, you know, I really would encourage, take the opportunities when they present themselves to engage early, whether that's, you know, in-service modernization, you know, the AITs coming on board to install things on your ship, whether it's ONR or us or someone showing up to install some weird one-off thing for an underway. The more feedback we can get to deliver back to the folks, the engineers that are all trying to do great things, but they just don't have our perspective. So the more we can get that perspective back, the better. The second thing is, you know, looping back to the question of unmanned witty. We're all unmanned witties. This is such a new technology that anyone can come with good ideas. So I would encourage, you know, anyone out there who has a great idea how you think we should be able to be using these things, please come find us. Surf Devron. We are the, by mandate, we're here to do this. So if you don't have the opportunity yourself, come find me. We'll take that on board and do what we can to either figure out whether it's doable or not and work with the program office. Please stop by, see Seahawk. She's a great vessel with some great capability.
Great.
I'll go ahead and take the question there on the 1000 class. Obviously, this is a question that I get very often. I'm extremely biased, but at the same time, as I try to look at it from an unbiased lens, the progress that the ship class has made since I've been involved with it is unbelievable. And do we have some work to do? Yes, we do. You know, we are not at IOC yet. Are we ready to deploy today? No, we are not ready to deploy today. But I think that we are much closer to making that first trip across the date line than many may think. And when we do get there, I am confident that the 1000 class is going to provide a conventional deterrent that it is difficult to make comparisons to maybe the intro to TLAM or something like that as we get out there. Okay, I got the hook.
Thanks.
Hey, I would just end where I started. Swifter, higher, stronger. We can't have the best equipment and fall short on execution. And I have no doubt with the sailors in the United States Navy that we can execute, but it's really incumbent upon the senior leaders to really understand how we resource these systems to ensure we can execute on the day we need to execute.
Awesome. Well, listen, thanks for your questions. There's actually another dozen in here that I did not get to, so we've actually had some really great participation. If you want to hit us up afterward, please do so. We're happy to get after those questions. Thanks to our panelists for sharing your perspective and insights. I always find it valuable. I want to keep the conversation going and certainly sharpen the pencil and get after some of the things we've talked about. So SNA, thanks so much for supporting us and having us out here, and appreciate the continued dialogue. Thanks.